Yeah, so I joined the Marine Corps. It was something that I always wanted to do as a kid growing up. I looked up to people like Anthony. I looked up to the Special Forces community. I looked up to people like Navy SEALs and Green Berets and Rangers and all those guys. I was a kid playing GI Joes with airsoft guns in my backyard all summer long, and I view myself as a patriot, somebody who loves his country, and I thought that by joining the military, that was the best thing that I could do for my country. The biggest sacrifice that I can make for America and the American people was to join the military. And so I did it out of like this patriotic mindset to go in. I never saw combat or anything like that. But I did my time and I realized I didn't want to serve anymore. I wanted to get out and do other things with my life. While I was in, I was pretty much MAGA through and through. I had voted for Trump once or twice. His first, I think the first two times he ran. I did not vote, period, the last election. And I started waking up to Trump, really waking up to Trump leading up to the election. And just kind of paying attention more to his allegiance to Israel. And my thing was, I'm not going to side with a politician that sides with Israel because I view them as our greatest adversary. I view Israel as America's greatest threat. And if I see any politician, left or right, Republican or Democrat, that sides with Israel, I see that as borderline treason. I see them as a traitor, and I'm not going to support them. So that was the first thing that woke me up to Trump. And I mean, it's just escalated since he's been in office this time. I mean, he's literally bragging about being the best friend Israel has ever had in the White House.
Well, listen, they're a really great country and they've given me a lot of money, so I have to placate them just a little bit. You understand that's business. That's how it goes. I try to make light of it because what else can you do? It is, I think, the last bastion of our current political system. I think that Trump was, I mean, him and Bernie were both kind of that last bastion of hope for populism in the United States. We saw the lengths that this oligarchic class that's almost universally Zionist on top of everything else, that they were willing to do in order to put us down. I almost joined the service after 9/11. I remember this girl that I dated who I liked a lot, she ended up going in. She met her husband there. He died. He was killed on his third tour. And even today, knowing all that we know, when he went to Iraq, and it's like, your government lies to you. Even the great United States of America will lie to you because this isn't about freedom and democracy. It's about resources. It's about money and power. This tale as old as time. And now you really can't hide it anymore because I paid close attention to Trump as I did Bernie that whole summer of 2015, which was just such a political odyssey for so many people. You finally had these guys that were running for office that were talking about the real everyday problems that probably hadn't been discussed to that degree since Kennedy was in the White House. And I think so much of the way that things had evolved in a negative fashion, people really put their hopes into Trump, which is why millions switched over from Bernie after what they did to him in the primary. And ultimately, as an FU to the Democratic establishment, they said, well, you know what? We're going to take a chance on Trump. Maybe he'll do something. And initially, I think, especially the first thing he did when he got in, which was axe the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I said, okay, you know what? Got to give this guy his due. Maybe he's really going to try to help this country. And then little by little, we saw all of these manifestations of things that would ultimately happen. But everything that's transpired over the last 2 years, I think has completely crystallized just how detrimental this relationship with Israel really is. I think we're uncovering things that we were never aware of. I mean, it was probably right underneath our noses. We just didn't smell it. But now we can. It's like, oh, yeah, that's right. That's exactly why that happened. That's why that happened. And now we are all kind of in many ways, I think, these little detectives asking questions that normally we wouldn't ask. We're a very curious batch of politicos that are out there right now that are trying to figure out, what the problem is. I think we've identified it. Now, how do we solve it? What's the future look like as far as how we bring these populist factions together to save our country?
Yeah, I mean, people have asked me plenty of times, how do we change? What do we do? I get DMs all the time from followers asking, I want to get involved. I want to do more. How can we stop this? How can we take our country back? And there's only so much that we can do when we're divided. I mean, there's nothing we can do when we're divided. And there's only so much that we can do when we are united. And that's another one of my angles, the content that I try to promote and post is to unify the country. And if you remember, it's not that long ago, what happened with Charlie Kirk, that was 9/10. 9/11 is supposed to be the one day out of the year that the country comes together and is united together, regardless of political differences. This 9/11, nobody was talking about 9/11. Everybody was at each other's throats. Everybody was hating their neighbor. And that's what I try to avoid is this political separation, hating your neighbor on your left, hating the guy next door because he voted this way, or because he's a Democrat, or because he's a Republican. And that's really what they want. They want the political divide between the commonwealth, between the common folk, between the peasants in their eyes. They want us at each other's throats. And that way, we don't see what they're doing at the top, and we're not focused on them. So if we don't come together as a nation and realize that it is the oligarchs, it is the global elites, it is the Zionists, it is the corrupt politicians and the corporations that are pitting us against each other, and get over our small differences, nothing's going to change. There's going to be no revolution. There's going to be no change at all. And so, we can talk about revolution. People ask me, oh, we need a revolution. How do we start a revolution? Well, I don't think there's going to be an armed revolution. This isn't 1776. I don't think America's cut out for that anymore. And I don't think that's necessarily what we need anyways. But if we can come together as Americans and come together on the same page to be against the global elites, to be against the Zionists, that's where we can actually make change. If we can boycott these corporations, if we can go on strikes, if we could get millions of Americans to say, you know what, you're not taking my tax dollars and doing good things with it. You're funding a genocide. If millions of Americans just said, I'm not going to pay taxes this season, we could bring the system down to their knees.
Well, that's libertarianism at its finest. I used to be very confused about the ideology because socially, I am extremely libertarian. If you're not bothering anybody, it's your own personal preference, do whatever you want. We all know that so much of the culture war that's transpired over the last 7 to 10 years is predominantly all about controlling capital. It has nothing to do with whether people have individual liberty or if people are being targeted specifically because of their sexuality, gender, whatever. All of that stuff to me is one big distraction from the realities of what we deal with on a regular basis. But when I would hear different people within the libertarian circles, I've had Angela McArdle on the channel. I've had Ron Paul's main guy, Daniel McAdams, on. The whole concept about not paying taxes isn't about we don't care about we the people. Libertarians recognized a long time ago that the government is corrupt. It is not your friend. If you fall under the liberal political ideology that the government can actually help you or that's what it's there to do, you've already lost, which is why I try to emphasize so much to the progressive wings of politics, is that there is nothing wrong with the government if the government is working for you. Mm-hmm. Thomas Jefferson had one of the greatest sayings in the history of our country. When people fear the government, there is tyranny. When the government fears the people, there is liberty. If you look at any country in the world, France probably being the most obvious example, the French government fears the shit out of their people because they know they'll put the yellow vests on, they'll get in the streets and they'll demand shit. That's why France has the best healthcare in the world. They're always rated #1. And it's like, yeah, because the government actually fears their people because they know that their people demand a decent life and they're willing to give it to them. Whereas here in the United States, it's like we just accept the little crumbs that we're given and accept, well, that's all we're entitled to. No, we're entitled to a hell of a lot more in terms of, the basis of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think that's been lost by a lot of people. And I think these divisions that we see every day it's all designed at the top, all of it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's a distraction, man. They push these culture wars, these race wars, these religious wars, getting Muslims and Christians against each other, getting the left and right against each other, getting the gays and the straights or whatever else, whatever demographic of people you want to use. They'll pin us against each other and get us to stop focusing on the real issues.
In terms of the elected officials on Capitol Hill, now I'm going to give you a little crash course into how I came into this whole situation and my partner, Jen Perlman. She is the lady who ran against one of the absolute worst federally elected representatives in this country, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. We ran a couple of congressional races against her. The first one probably could have done even better than it ultimately ended up doing, considering how we were complete novices in the political game. However, we were able to get almost 30% of the vote on the first go-around. And then this last election cycle, Jen made a very conscious decision from the beginning that she was going to unabashedly run as a pro-Palestine Jew in South Florida. Now, of course, there was no way she was going to win that election, but it was a necessary conversation to uplift the voices that feel voiceless and show that we, the people, is much stronger than the ideological differences that people want us to, the powers that be, want us to be separated by. Wasserman Schultz is a particularly loathsome human being because she is always ready, willing, and able to fly over to her favorite country, take pictures with Milikowski. Remember, that's Netanyahu's real name.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a traitor to the United States. A person who has taken over $1 million from the Israel lobby, a person who always votes in their favor, and on top of everything else, she's one of the most aggressive insider traders in this country. So if we have a federal legislature that is trading on inside information, and it isn't just any inside information, it's primarily war profiteering insider information that they're profiting on. I don't understand how we do not go the libertarian route and just say, oh, I'm not paying my taxes anymore. Why should I? I don't have a say in where my money goes. I don't understand how that's not a bigger movement. Maybe it's becoming one and we're just not aware of it, but these conversations are helping to facilitate. And if in any way this is helping, then heck, I'm here for it, man.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I probably should push for more and bring more light to is think about it. If millions of Americans got on the same page and they just said, I don't care if I'm left or right, I don't care who you voted for, who I voted for. We all don't like what the government is doing with our money. This is our hard-earned money. You know, if you're an entrepreneur, you get taxed heavily. If you're self-employed, you get taxed heavily. We can't afford houses out here. You know, my generation, we can't, we know my peers or my people in my generation get out of college and they go hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt and they hope they're going to get a good paying job and then go live the American dream and go buy a house and have a family and have kids. Why is the birth rate so low? Because nobody wants to have kids. My generation doesn't want to have kids right now. We can't afford it. We can't even afford to buy a house. You know, my grandparents could. They could get married at 20, 21, buy a house and have kids and just be fine. We can't do that today. So if we don't like how our money's being spent, it's not doing us any benefit. And everything is so expensive, then why don't we come together and say, you know what, we're not going to pay taxes. We're just not going to pay taxes. We don't like that you're funding a genocide with our money, and then we're not getting any of the money back ourselves.
What are some of the populist policies that you would support? You know, I've often said that friend of the show, Clint Russell, who has contemplated also running against another one of the worst scumbags in all of politics, Randy Fine, you know, he has always been a fierce advocate for ending the Fed. And to his surprise, Jen and I both want to end the Fed, but we also want a single payer healthcare system. And I asked him, would you be willing to compromise on single payer if we rally the populist left on ending the Fed? And he said, absolutely. And I don't see why more of these right and left populist conversations don't happen, because the presumption is always, and I see this on all these channels, I'm sure you see it too, and the left, in my opinion, is just as bad as the right, where it's always this divide and conquer strategy. Well, this person doesn't like gay people, or this person, again, live and let live, respect everyone's opinions and beliefs. But at the end of the day, if we're going to live in a society, there are elements to that society that we will only thrive if we have these basic needs met. Healthcare happens to be one of them. Education is another. The quality of our air and water is another. And whether or not we continue to be the world's hegemony regarding endless war is another as well. And I'm thinking there probably isn't that big of a difference in many respects as far as where people see these particular problems. I'd like to think there's a lot of crossover. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's enough money being paid into the system where we can have free healthcare, we can have free education just like other countries. It's the fact that we put so much money into the military industrial complex. We put more money into the military, more money into the military industrial complex by far than any other country. And we rally around that concept of patriotism in our troops. And I'm glad that I can be in the military and be, thanked for my service and people are grateful for that. Sure. But there's too much emphasis on that. They're using veterans kind of as this way to promote warmongering and to promote shoveling more and more and more money into the military industrial complex. And I was just talking to Anthony about this a couple weeks ago. Our military should be and is designed to be a defensive force, not an offensive force. But we have historically been used as an offensive force, or more so a defensive force for Israel. They go and attack somebody, and then we defend them. And we send our money, our tax-paying dollars, and our troops to go over there and fight those wars. We're putting far too much money into our military industrial complex, going over and destabilizing countries in the Middle East and all over the world, helping Israel, and we're not keeping that money here at home to help the people that actually need it, the homeless, the mental health crisis in America, free Medicare, free healthcare, free education. So my thing is, we need to stop this warmongering, stop pushing so much money into the military industrial complex, and keep it here at home. So I don't know what policy, what was the term you used?
But, well, I look at it as economic populism is
Yeah.
always the order of the day, because in the end, one thing I learned, especially in the labor movement, is that you have just as many Trump supporters as you do Bernie supporters. You seldom have corporate centrist friendly type people that are in that world. I'm always hypercritical of, the typical, Kamala Harris, Biden type of voter, the gleeful ones, if you will. Because what I've learned is that as this country continues to become more and more technologically dependent,
Mhm.
we are faced with a situation that when things really start to get bad, especially with AI's takeover of our country, and they decide what you can and can't say, the people who are capable of living off the grid, like you are, and I think I could be, I mean, there are certain things that I understand about basic survival skills, but there's probably a lot of things I need to brush up on that I should. I think we're living in a situation where the people who should be having the most to say about our future are ones who actually are going to know what to do when ish really hits the fan in a very bad way. I've always felt that AI in particular is almost like a tool of the devil in so many respects, because again, it's creating a world where they want you to be inferior. They want you to be helpless and that you can't actually survive. When it comes to something like creatures of comfort and people in particular who want to live comfortable lives, I have a very simple attitude about that. And this is something that individuals like yourself, I know, always appreciate. Comfort is not your right. It is a privilege to live comfortably. If you think you're entitled to anything in this world, you're in for a very rude awakening, because things are changing very rapidly, very quickly, because the
Agreed.
people that have been willing to put up with your ish for so long are now starting to see it for what it is, and they don't like it. And eventually, the dam is going to break. So I do think it is imperative that if we're going to create a more populist world that we're hoping to have to kind of rewrite the history of this country, that to me, in so many ways, starts with recognizing what the actual issue is here. If people are not recognizing the downside of technology, it's a great asset, it's a great detriment. Without it, you and I don't know each other. But also, it is creating this culture of dependency where
Yeah.
we want people to step up and fight back, but they don't really know how to do it because they're stuck in their creatures of comfort, wanting to fight in spite of that. This isn't 1776, but it's going to end up that way if we don't fight back and fight back quick, as far as I can see.
Yeah, I think there is a radical movement, and I joined kind of late. I didn't see the whole hour previously to when I came in here, but when people are driven to far left or far right, that can be problematic. And you were just talking about Nick Fuentes of like he's seen as the savior to
Yeah.
so many people now because they don't know where else to turn. So they're turning to this one guy who's saying things that nobody else is saying. And I a lot of people that I know have differing opinions on Nick Fuentes. Some people absolutely despise him, some people absolutely love him, and some people are in between. I'm a little bit in between. There's nobody out there in
Yeah.
the political sphere that I just agree with them wholeheartedly on everything. I've got my own brain and my own way of thinking. But there are certainly things I like about Nick Fuentes, and there are certainly things I don't like about him. But I think it's dangerous when people feel so hopeless and so lost that they see this guy as like a messiah or a savior. And I think that's what happened with Trump, and that's how he got elected again. You know, he you
Yes.
could see him telegraphing his radical policies. You could see him telegraphing his heavy support for Israel before he even got in office. But people were so fed up with what they had before with Biden or whatever else, the culture wars or whatever else, that they just all voted for Trump. And that was a lot of my generation. So these people who are driven to these extremes will go and find the most extreme person. And I think that is a little bit dangerous when you just wholeheartedly believe and trust somebody as if they're like this messiah figure. That's what happened with Trump, and I think that's what's happening with possibly Nick Fuentes as well.